Right, right. Was there anything in common? Do you think that kind of why France, Germany, and Italy would move more right? Do they have something in common that you think pushed the people in that direction that the other nations maybe don't have as much? Or do they have more immigrants flooding into their countries?
Yes. Yes, I think that this is Italy, of course, due to their geographic position, has been the main recipient of immigrants from over the Mediterranean. Germany has been the main recipient due to the completely idiotic policies of Angela Merkel, which was, as you said at the beginning of our conversation, which was definitely this was an open borders policy. I mean, if you say whoever comes can stay, that is an open. I don't know how else you want to describe this.
Right, right.
And in France, you have similar developments, particularly in the urban areas. I mean, the French always, by nature, I think, would have been more conservative. But as I said before, the the deep state, kind of the marinated institutions and the left leaning media made it very hard for the people to voice what I would call their true opinions. Although that makes me sound like a Marxist who claims that I know better what the people think than they do. But I think that's an important element to keep in mind as well. I mean, most people like their country, and I think there was a sense in Germany, especially, that over the last couple of years, and I think in the United States as well. I mean, a common friend of ours, right? I mean, Batya Ungasargon, she has written her new book, Second Class. I think makes a similar case that it's what very often is claimed in news and media that the people are dumb and racist and bigoted and intolerant. They are not. I mean, and they don't have to be. It's, for me, it's always, I assume you love your mother. I love my mother, and I think I don't have to hate your mom because I love mine. And I think most people who are patriotic, most people who love their country, don't hate anybody else's country, but very often they want to keep most parts of their traditions, of their way of life. Which again, this is the thing. No, nobody in Germany says that they have a problem with a Turkish restaurant opening down the street. When they have a problem is, and this is just an example what happened 2 days ago, if you have a ceremony where somebody gets German citizenship and the person who hands over the document is a woman, and the man who's getting German citizenship, then refuses to shake the hand of the civil servant because she's a woman, that is where people usually draw the line, because they
Right.
say you just got a great passport, and getting a German passport, getting an Austrian passport is an awesome thing. And then you cannot even get over yourself and shake the hand of the person that made this possible just because she happens to be a woman. This is where people say this just rubs them the wrong way, and I think justifiably so. And this is happening, unfortunately, more often, because whatever one thinks about it, and as I said, I have no issue with Islam in the Islamic world, but I do
Mhm.
have an issue with a self-assertive Islam in Europe, because the question I have to ask is why, as you mentioned before, the Taliban are not anybody's idea of a great group of people. But if
Right.
you flee from the Taliban, if you come to Austria, I mean, why would you then try to replicate so many of the horrible policies or ideas that the Taliban stand for? That's the part I don't understand,
Yeah.
right? You say, I leave Afghanistan because those guys do a horrible job. And then you come to another country and say, oh my, I wish we would have the same rules in this country as in the horrible country that I voluntarily left. That's, I think, what many in Europe don't understand.
Right. Yeah, I think it's completely fair for all countries to demand that people who come into their nations assimilate. That they say,
I think
"Look,
so
if you
too.
wanna be one of us, then you need to be one of us. Like, you can be here but you've gotta assimilate into our culture, and you can't be bringing," like you said, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And I think America, we have a bunch of people from, I'm half Vietnamese. My family came over from Vietnam as refugees from the war, and they've completely assimilated. I mean, they are as American as they're they're like MAGA Americans, loving Republican.
Ultra
They
MAGA
hate,
Americans.
yeah, they're just very they love freedom, they love entrepreneurship, they love, starting their businesses and having the right to say what they want to say. I mean, they adopted American values that they weren't granted, that they were afraid, of the communism that came through Vietnam. And so I think that we see that a lot here in the United States. Like, I have a lot of friends who are technically, I suppose, Muslim, right? They come from Muslim countries like Iran, for example. A lot of them have come from Iran, but they're not, they're secular, they're very secular Muslims. They've adopted completely American lifestyles, American way of thinking, American way of being, and they don't want anything to do with any sort of Sharia laws or anything like that. So I think it really, I think in America there's been a good The people I know from I live in California, practically everybody's Latino here, and they're American as American can be. It's so I think there's some for some reason the United States has been able to ensure that most of the people assimilate, I think, pretty well. But I could see where in Europe that would be harder to do because Europe, and what I love about Europe, I've lived in Italy, I've lived in France. Um, what I love about Europe is the unique culture that each country has. Unlike America, we don't have that same sort of strong culture. So it's very difficult, I think, for an immigrant to come into a European country and truly assimilate in. I mean, they would have to try harder, I think, than what they do here in the United States. And maybe the motivation is different too. Um, First of all, I think those who come from South America already have a similar culture as America anyway. Naturally, there's a lot of shared religion, shared family values. There's a lot of that shared stuff there. But so maybe in Europe, the positioning, the geographical positioning is a little different because you've got people around you that are immigrating in who maybe are a bit more different. But I'm Asian. It doesn't get much different than Asian, you know, coming to the United States. But there's been the assimilation that has happened. So I don't know why, with Europe, it is I would love for each individual European country to retain its unique flavor because that does make it better for tourism. But that,
No, I mean, I would say because I think you're absolutely right. On a more optimistic note, I would say the United States, you described it perfectly. The great thing about the United States is that it's even very possible, if not even easy, for a first generation immigrant to fully assimilate. That is
yeah,
harder in Europe. That is hard in Europe. But this is why I'm kind of so keen, as you just mentioned as well, about assimilation, because it's about the children. And I know this sounds now I sound like a politician, but it really is. Listen, if I would move to America as an Austrian, I would also retain certain. But for example, my brother lives in New York, and he and his wife, they raise their children as much as American as apple pie. I mean, they still, because they want to talk to their grandparents, so they still speak German and everything. But
right.
my nephew is a Buffalo Bills fan, and all this kind of things. So he knows football teams I've never heard of, and his idols are people I've never heard of. So he's fully American. Because kids assimilate very, very quickly in school with their friends
Yeah,
and everything. And what I find so worrisome in the European case with Muslim immigration is I don't expect the Afghan guy who comes over or the Somali guy to immediately become Austrian and dance waltz and put on a pair of lederhosen and all these kind of things. But what they very often tend to do, and what I think we allow too often, is they seclude their children from the broader
mm,
population. So they also try to prevent their children from integrating. So they create a generation, and this is particularly, I think, the case in France. You then have a generation of young people that are neither Algerian nor French. They're in a
right.
netherworld, right? They're in permanent purgatory. So they are born in France, which makes them French, but they never really were part of the French society because their parents or grandparents or whatever it was they very often try to prevent them from going out. And I think this is a problem. I think this is kind of this is when they really mean it's about the children,
Yeah,
because if you and I don't one of my best friends, his father is from Egypt, and he looks very Egyptian, but we grew up together, and the only time when I realized that he actually looks Egyptian is if we meet somebody else who has never met him before and says, oh, you must have an interesting story because you don't look typically Austrian. Because
yeah,
children, like if you grow up with somebody, you stop it really, like you really become colorblind. That actually does happen. But then
yeah,
you need to have you need to give the second generation in particular every tool possible to assimilate. I fully agree with you. Like everybody can become Austrian. You can be
right.
black, you can be, you can have Vietnamese background, you can have, Middle East. It's all possible. But you need to create the conditions, but they also must want to. And this is always the debate in France and everywhere else. Putting your daughter in a burqa, right? It might not be illegal, but you will not allow that child, that woman, to ever integrate into this new country that you
Right.
decided to make her home, right? I don't, sorry, I don't mean to,
Yeah,
to, to ramble on, but this is so weird. So you come from a country, another country, and fine, you say you did it for economic reasons, you have no interest in integrating in that culture, fair enough. But if you say, I will make this our family's home for generations to come, wouldn't you at some point say that means that I have to enable my children to make this not just geographically, but emotionally their home as well. And there
Yeah.
is, unfortunately, in some migrant communities, a lack of doing this. I mean, I always find this so interesting. We have a small, since you mentioned, we have a small Vietnamese community in Austria. There's actually a very large Vietnamese community in France. They are wonderfully
Mhm.
integrated. The high school and university attainment of Vietnamese French is higher than of quote unquote white French, right?
Mhm.
But they are so perfect because they're perfectly integrated. They go to the finest écoles, they go to the finest universities because they are smart, they know the language. Their parents value education. Yes, it's a cliche. Is it true for everyone? No. But on average, it's true. And it's the same in Austria, right? These people are, everybody likes them, and they speak the language, they speak the same accent, the same dialect as I. Nobody even, this is the thing, when they are not seen as migrants. That's the big thing. We say migrants, but when you say migrant to European, they usually depict somebody from the Middle East or North Africa. They don't think about someone from China. They don't think about someone from the US. They don't think about someone from Vietnam. On the contrary, right? This is, they say, oh, those people, they are more than welcome to come.
I think, yeah, it's so interesting. I think the difference in the United States, what's helped so many assimilate is the US made concerted effort to spread people out. I mean, when my family came from Vietnam, I mean, we ended up in Boise, Idaho, of all places, and there was a very, very few Vietnamese that were sent to Boise, Idaho, but there you had to be sponsored. That's how the country typically has it, is you got to be sponsored by people, and they spread all these Vietnamese people out all throughout the country. Eventually, now there was like a big migration of Vietnamese that they were in these cold northern states and said, "What are we doing here? This is not our typical climate." And so there was a great migration that happened in the mid to late 80s where they started going and kind of creating enclaves like where my family lives now in Westminster, California, which is Little Saigon. There's a big hub there. There's a big hub in Houston and in Florida. There's in Arizona, there's hubs. But many of us, but we were integrated in pretty early on with, with all of the other Americans, and so I think that spreading out of people, we're a
Yes.
much larger country, though we're able to do that. And in Europe, how do you go about doing that? I definitely think it's much more challenging in Europe to bring in all of these migrants and assimilate them than it is here in the United States when you can spread them out. But you make such great points. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show, which you could catch just by heading to that link down below, KimIversonShow.com. You can watch the full show from what you just watched, or you could catch the full show live Monday through Friday, live streams, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern at KimIversonShow.com. See you then. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Never miss an episode. Never miss a clip. Never miss a segment. Thanks, guys.